One touch meant death, not poison, not a weapon, not a trap, just a box, built in the middle of a desert, by former slaves and with no workshops, no machines, no precision tools. Yet its measurements were exact down to the smallest detail. 3 perfect layers, pure gold, acacia wood, sacred design. One mistake in building it, and it would be rejected. One mistake in handling it, and someone would die. And today no one knows where it is. This was not just a religious artifact. It was the most restricted object in human history. Only a handful of people could carry it. Only one man could approach it closely, only once per year. And according to ancient records, when entire armies stood before it, walls collapsed. But before it became an object of fear, power, and mystery, it started with an impossible command. At the top of Mount Sinai, far above the camp of Israel, Moses receives instructions from God. Not vague ideas, not symbolic suggestions, exact measurements to specific materials, construction techniques. This wasn't make something meaningful. This was engineering, but there was a problem. Israel had just escaped Egypt after 400 years of slavery. These were brickmakers, laborers, survivors. They had no metal shops, no carving studios, no goldsmith guilds. And now they were being asked to build an object requiring master-level craftsmanship in gold, woodwork, textiles, and stone. So who could possibly do this? The answer marks the first time something unusual happens in the Bible. God chooses a man named Bezalel from the tribe of Judah and fills him with the Spirit of God. Not to preach, not to lead, but to build. Skill, precision, artistic intelligence. Metalwork, wood carving, design. Bezalel becomes history's first recorded spirit-empowered craftsman. And he's not alone. Another man, Oholiab, joins him. Together, they are tasked with creating something no one had ever seen before. But skill wasn't the only problem. Where do runaway slaves get the materials for a golden sacred object? Before leaving Egypt, the Israelites asked the Egyptians for gold, silver, and clothing. And after the devastation of 10 plagues, the Egyptians gave freely. Jewelry, bracelets, earrings, fine garments. When construction began, the people brought so much gold that Moses had to order them to stop. But gold was only the beginning. God specified acacia wood, one of the few trees tough enough to survive the Sinai desert. Dense, durable, resistant to decay, a wood that could endure decades of travel. Then came fabrics, fine linen, blue thread, scarlet thread, and purple. Purple dye in the ancient world was more expensive than gold. A single gram required thousands of crushed sea mollusks. It was a color of royalty, of kings. Why would a wandering desert people be asked to build with the materials of royalty? Because this object was not just a container, it was a throne. Not for a human king, but for an invisible one. And the space above it, between sculpted cherubim, would be described as the place where heaven met earth. But before that throne could exist, the most dangerous stage of all had to begin. The construction, and this is where the risk started. Not just for those who touched it later, but for the man building it. Bezalel begins with acacia wood, cutting every board to the millimeter. He doesn't measure with rulers. He uses ropes with knots tied at precise intervals, a technique he likely learned by watching Egyptian masters. Every cut must be perfect. 1 millimeter off and the arc would be rejected. Next comes the gold, pure, soft, unforgiving gold. You cannot just paste sheets onto wood. It tears, bends, folds. It must be hammered, shaped, and applied with unbelievable precision. Too thin and it rips. Too thick and the layers don't fit. Every centimeter must be flawless. And there's more. This wasn't decoration. 3 layers are required. 1. Acacia wood core 2-point gold overlay inside 3. Gold overlay outside. The result? A 150-kilogram object, impossible for 2 people to lift. Even the top edge is reinforced with gold, not for beauty, but for structural survival during transport. Here's the part modern researchers call incredible. The arc's layers, gold, wood, gold, behave like a giant electrical capacitor. Gold conducts, wood insulates. Move it across the dry desert, static charges build. Touch it wrong and it could deliver a lethal jolt. And the cherubim on top like electrical discharge points. Some theorists suggest any human touching it with a different charge could be killed instantly. Bezalel had no idea. He just knew he had to finish the lid, carving the most dangerous design on earth. The mercy seat between the cherubim where God's presence would dwell. Then came the most mysterious part, what would go inside. 3 objects, each carrying immense spiritual and physical power. 1. The tablets of the law, carved by God's own finger, the original 10 Commandments. Note: these were actually the second set. The first had been broken when Moses saw the people worshipping the golden calf. 2 Aaron's rod, a dead staff that bloomed overnight producing leaves, flowers, and almonds, proof of God's chosen priesthood. 3 manna, bread from heaven. Normally it rotted by the next day. Inside the ark it stayed preserved for centuries. Each object represented something sacred: law, God's word; rod, and authority; manna, provision. And all 3 together made the ark more than sacred. It was a physical manifestation of divine order, a container of power no human could control. The ark was now complete, empty, dangerous, and ready to judge anyone who mishandled it. But the danger didn't end there. The ark was complete, but no one could just walk up, grab it, and move it. This wasn't furniture, it wasn't treasure. It wasn't even just sacred, it was restricted. God gave transport instructions as precise as the construction plans. Break one rule, and someone would die. Only one group in all Israel could carry it: the Levites, specifically the family of Kohath. But even they could not touch it. Before every movement of the ark, preparation began days in advance. Washings, purification rituals, offerings burned on the altar. Abstinence, not fasting. Why? Because this wasn't just physical contact, it was approaching the throne of God. When the camp moved, priests first entered the sanctuary and took down the heavy veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. That veil had always been a barrier, a warning that God's presence was not casually approached. They used that same veil to cover the ark. Then came another covering, animal skins. Then a third layer, a cloth of pure blue. Only when it was fully hidden were the carrying poles inserted through gold rings on its sides. No skin contact, no exposed surface. No mistakes, 4 men, 1 at each corner. The weight pressing on their shoulders, steps synchronized. Imagine the tension if one stumbled, if the ark tilted, if instinct took over. That's exactly what happened years later. King David was bringing the ark to Jerusalem. But he made a critical decision, one that felt logical. Instead of Levites carrying it on poles, the ark was placed on a new cart, pulled by oxen. Safer, it seemed, easier. But God had never authorized that method. The journey began smoothly: music, celebration, joy. Then the oxen stumbled. The cart shook violently. The ark shifted, beginning to slide. A man named Uzzah walked beside it. He saw the sacred object about to fall. His reaction was human. He reached out and touched it. Instantly he collapsed. No weapon, no visible cause, just contact and death. The celebration stopped, music died. Joy turned to fear. Why? Because the rule had not been forgotten, it had been ignored. The ark could not be managed by human logic. It operated under divine protocol, and this revealed something terrifying. The ark was not a tool. It was not a symbol. It was not controlled by priests, kings, or armies. It could only be approached on God's terms. And when people tried to use it instead of honor it, disaster followed. But individual deaths were only the beginning. Because when the ark entered warfare, entire cities discovered what happened when they stood against the presence it carried. When Israel went to war, the ark sometimes went with them. Not as a charm, not as a decoration. As a sign that their king was present. Before battle, leaders stood before it and sought direction from God. Yes or no, go or don't go. Victory depended not on numbers, but obedience. The ark was never placed on the front lines where enemies could seize it easily. It stood behind the army, visible enough for everyone to know. God is here. The psychological effect was massive. Israel fought with confidence. Their enemies fought with fear. And nowhere was this more dramatic than at Jericho. Jericho's walls were legendary, thick, reinforced, a fortress city. Militarily, it was considered nearly impossible to breach. Yet Israel did not build siege towers. They did not use battering rams. Instead, something strange happened. For 6 days, priests carried the ark around the city once per day. No attack, no arrows, no assault. Just movement, silence. Trumpets. Imagine being inside Jericho, watching an army walk in circles around you, carrying a mysterious gold object they claimed held their God's presence. On the 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times. 7 priests blew trumpets, then the people shouted when all at once. And the walls collapsed, not inward like a typical invasion. Archaeological findings suggest the walls fell outward, as if pushed from inside. Whether by miracle, resonance, or power, we don't understand. Jericho fell without a conventional fight. But here's the critical pattern. The ark only brought victory when Israel was in obedience. Later, Israel went into battle against the Philistines, but this time they were living in corruption and disobedience. They brought the ark anyway, God assuming it guaranteed victory. It didn't. 30,000 soldiers died, and for the first time the ark was captured by enemies. The Philistines celebrated. They placed it in the temple of their god Dagon. The next morning, Dagon's statue lay face down before the ark. They lifted it back up. The following morning it had fallen again, this time shattered. Then disease broke out, tumors, panic death. City after city suffered until the Philistines realized something terrifying. They hadn't captured Israel's God. They had brought his presence into their cities without permission. They sent the ark away in fear. This revealed the core truth. The ark did not belong to a nation. It did not obey human control. It represented a presence that acted on its own authority, and if war showed its power publicly, the most dangerous encounter with it happened in total silence, once per year, in the darkest, most restricted room on earth. There was one day each year when a human being stood closer to the ark than anyone else alive. The Day of Atonement, and only one person on earth could do it. The high priest, not because he was brave, not because he was powerful, but because he was appointed as a mediator. For days beforehand he prepared. He left his home, separated from his family, stayed within the temple complex, washing rituals, offerings, study of instructions, careful repetition, because if he made one mistake, he would die alone inside the most sacred space on earth. On the day itself he removed his ornate garments of gold and jewels. Instead he wore simple white linen, humility before holiness. First he sacrificed a bull for his own sins, because no one, not even the high priest, approached God as perfect. Then came the most critical detail. He took a censer filled with burning coals from the altar. In his hands he carried finely ground incense. He entered the Holy of Holies. Darkness, silence. The ark hidden beneath the coverings. He placed the incense onto the coals. Smoke filled the room. This wasn't symbolic decoration. The smoke formed a cloud, a barrier, so he would not see the full manifestation of God's glory above the ark. Without the cloud, he would die. Then he exited briefly, took blood from the sacrifice, and entered again. 7 times he sprinkled blood on and before the mercy seat. Why? Because inside the ark were the tablets of the law, the covenant agreement. Israel had broken that covenant again and again. The blood symbolically covered the record of failure. This was not ritual theater. This was a legal transaction, a national courtroom. The ark as the covenant vault, the high priest as defense representative. The ritual lasted only minutes. But in those moments, one man stood between a nation and judgment. No one could follow him. No one could help him. No one could enter if something went wrong. And then after centuries of this exact pattern, the ark vanished. No destruction record, no recovery, no confirmed location, the most restricted object in history, gone. And that disappearance is one of the greatest mysteries the ancient world ever left behind. In 586 BC, the unthinkable happened. Babylon invaded Jerusalem. For thousands of years, the Ark of the Covenant has stood at the intersection of faith, history, and mystery. An object built with impossible precision in a wilderness, carried with fear, approached with blood and smoke, connected to victories, disasters, and the rise and fall of nations. It was called a throne, a covenant vault, a meeting point between heaven and earth, and then it vanished, leaving behind questions no empire, army, or archaeologist has been able to answer. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it lies hidden beneath layers of stone and politics. Maybe it rests behind guarded walls in a distant land. Or maybe its disappearance was part of the story all along, because the ark was never meant to be a human possession. It was a reminder that power beyond us cannot be controlled, that access to the divine comes with boundaries, and that some mysteries remain, not because they are lost, but because they are waiting. If this story intrigued you, the next chapter goes even deeper. The temple built to house the ark was one of the most astonishing construction projects of the ancient world. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, engineering without modern machines, a structure designed around sacred geometry and symbolism. How did they build it? And what secrets were hidden inside its design? That journey continues.